Afternoon, everybody. Like Ben said, my name is Doug, and I'm going to be going over some more about field to finish. This is entitled Advanced Field to Finish. It is kind of, I don't know, I think last month I did a basic field to finish, and this is sort of a follow-up on that. Um, if you're looking at my screen, which I hope everybody is, um, this is an existing code table and a small amount of data just to demonstrate what the software can do and what you can do with the software. They and I'm going to pick up where kind of this left off. So what I'm looking at here is what I would call the absolute minimum. This is basic field to finish, which is essentially drawing line work based on the codes. Um, along with the line work, we have things like LP for a light pole, and it draws in that little symbol. Iron pipes. Um, I have a couple trees in here that I'm going to deal with separately, so those really haven't been dealt with. And you can see some line work that is, some of it is complete, some of it is partially, um, well, it's partially complete, like this house doesn't really look like that. Um, and what I'm going to do is just kind of step back through this code table, do a quick review of what is in it, and then how we go further than just this. So this is kind of like a step one, if at least to get going with field to finish and get your folks used to picking up data in the field, which really is the big difference between what they do with field to finish and what they're probably doing now is just simply keeping in mind that when you're connecting line work, anything that's set to be a line code, when you're connecting line work, you're drafting as you go in the field. So coding things in a sequential manner or a concise manner becomes a little bit more of what you think about than if you're being a little bit more random. So I'm going to go into field to finish and edit the code. So what I have here is a code table with just a small amount of data in it. So these are the codes that are represented into the data set there. So you can see by looking at these, I have a code called curb, and it draws lines, both a 3D and a 2D. On the 2D line will come in on a layer called curbs, and a 3D polyline, which is your brake line, goes on a layer called brake line. So Carlson, probably know this, considers three-dimensional brake lines as three-dimensional polylines as a brake line. So all the line work is set up similar. Edge of pavement is the same kind of thing. That it goes on a layer called pavement, but the 3D line goes on a layer called brake lines. So that's the way this is set up. The monuments have catch basin here, and then I pick a symbol for it. And that is a line only, a point only. Edge of gravel, driveway, houses, these are 2D polylines for non-brake line lines. And like I said, the oak tree and the elm tree I haven't dealt with. I'm going to do those separately. So one of the things about this as you begin to develop, this is a small code table, but when the code table I actually use in practice, there's about 250 codes, which believe it or not is not that great compared to other surveyors I've known that have 2 or 3 times that many codes in there. So at one time I reduced the amount of codes in there on purpose, and I got down to about 250 codes. So, but when you're looking at 250 codes, you're just kind of scrolling through a big dialog box here full of stuff. So one of the first things you can do is to add categories to organize your code table. So I can add a code table, and I can call one, let's say roads. If I could spell right. And I go back to, and then I can move into the category anything that has to do with roadways. So I can grab the curb and I can hold my control and pick edge of pavement, edge of gravel. I'll go ahead and add the driveway in there, anything you drive on. And I can move that category to roads. So now when I click on roads, I didn't get them all. Let me try that again. Maybe I have to move these. Yeah, I had to hold my shift key. So I can go back in here. The other way to do this is to click on, let's see, which ones did I not get? The edge of gravel I didn't get. You can also click on it here and add your category here, roads. Then I can look at unassigned ones and see what hasn't been assigned. And I could add another category called utilities. And I can grab the catch basin and the shed. Oh, not the shed. I mean the catch basin and the light pole and the drain manhole, and move those to utilities. I'm not doing that quite right. I'll just move that one at a time here. And so on. So I can show you an organized code table, the one that I use in practice, but I've not a ton of categories in there, but there's probably a dozen different categories. It makes it easier to go through now and make edits to your code table. So that's a good tip. So when we look at these line work codes, I'm just going to reprocess that real quick. And you can see that on here, I have a layer called break lines that always draws on top. The 3D lines draw on top. I can freeze that layer. And underneath, you can see the two-dimensional lines in these different colors and line types. So one of the problems with the way this is set up is that the point itself goes on the layer pavement as well as the line work. So the problem with that is I really don't want to see, when I print this, I don't really want to see the point number, elevation, description. Of course, I can freeze those independently because they go on 3 separate layers. But if you notice, all the descriptions go away because they're all on the same layer. So to take a look at that, these are the layers in this drawing. And by default, when you insert a Carlson point, it has a point block, and in that block contains 3 attributes. They fall on the layer point description, elevation, and number. So you see I have those frozen. So if I want some descriptions on and some not, I have to think about how I want to control all of that and segregate the point layers. And one easy way to do that, especially for line work, specifically for line work, is to select this option, distinct point layer. So now you can have as many point layers as you want. I'm not a fan of too many, so I'm going to actually just grab all my line work to go on. The points will go on a layer called points. Now, another thing that you can do for these, if you take a look at the drawing here, now this isn't bad because it's not a very cluttered set, it's a small site, it's 1 inch equals 20, but the text starts to get a little big and messy. So you can actually reduce the size of the text, I mean these attributes that I'm looking at, right here by the attribute size scaler. So that's going to control the size of the block and the attributes contained therein. So the default is always a 0.1. I can make it nice and small, 0.02. Now, to copy that setup, I can click in each one of these, but another good way of editing your code table is used to column options, and I can turn on distinct point layer. And let's see, I think attribute size may be on there as well. It is not, but I can add this same layer by just copying and pasting. So it's a faster way to edit each one of these. I can also hold my shift, click, and hit edit, and I get a different looking dialog box, and these are all the global edits I can make all at once. And one of them, I do believe, is attribute size right here. So we're going to go with the 0.02. It remembered that from the last one I put in there. Let's see, I didn't. Let's do that again. Right, so now look how tiny those are. So I tend to do that because with my line work, I don't really need to read these unless there is a problem with the line work, and then I can just zoom in and see them. So in a busy data set, reducing the size of the attributes is a good option. So let me just go into each one of these here and make sure I have my distinct point layer on. You can see it's already set. So now when you look at the data set, if I take a look at my layers and I just want to freeze my points, those can be off. So now the descriptions that are left are things like monuments, trees, manholes, catch basins, and those kind of things. I'm going to go ahead and turn everything back on. Another feature to look at here, and I think we can tell here, if you look at EPPC, this one has the full description on there. To make sure that that happens, or if you want that to happen, when you go into a code, there's an option to use the raw description, and I have it set to attribute block. What that means is whatever's typed in the field is going to show up in the drawing. So that way I can see all those additional notes or whatever the crew is putting in there. In the case of line work, I can see the PCs and the PTs, and then if there's something's wrong with the description, I can look right there in the drawing and see what was coded in the field. So I tend to like that option. And then again, that is used raw description. Attribute block means it's going to be part of the Carlson point block. You also have an option to just drop in text attribute. So they use the term attribute in both cases, attribute block or text attribute, but text attribute is literally a piece of text. So you're going to get a piece of text drawn at a standard text style unless you change it. And it's just going to drop that in right on the node. So I really don't want a lot of extra text. Now I do take advantage of that being able to draw text attributes, and I'll show you how I handle that in a little bit. All right, I'm going to process that one last time here to make sure I got everything cleaned up. So again, these, just the line work now are on a layer called points. These themselves are on a layer that's the same as the block. So I have the same issue with the point block being on the same layer as the symbol, but I'm going to come back to that and show you two different ways of dealing with that, of migrating the descriptions onto a different layer. so you can have more control over that. But first, I'm going to go back into doing some line work here. If I go into my code table and let's see, I want to sort this. So what I want to do is I can't move those down. I want to move that up. But when I go back into my code table, if I go into code table settings, there are some controls in here that matter as well. One of them is when you're using multiple codes. Now, as a reminder, multiple codes are just simply two codes separated by a space. And special codes, which I'm going to get into in a second here, are also separated by a space. So you can control how those multiple codes are used. They can be used for line work only, which I'm going to say probably 99% of multiple codes are used for line work. So that's not a bad option to have that. You can also have it work with line work and symbols or line work and points. So you can play with that a little bit and see how that controls. The only rule that I know about that, and that's because this is a newer option, having those three options. Line work only for a very long time was the only option. And if you have it on line work only, the only rule about that is that if you have a line work connecting to a symbol, is that when you code it, and I have that in this case, come down here, and if you look at the catch basin, the code is catch basin first, and then the curb line, which is this line here. So if you have it set to line work only, that's a rule that you have to follow, that the symbol comes first if they're double coded that way. Theoretically, anyways, if you have it line work and symbols, then it doesn't matter what order you put it in. So that's probably a better option. Like I said, this is newer. So if you're running older software, you might not have that option. I think that's only been there a few years. Now, these are like just some import-export options, but the split multiple codes, I always recommend to have it set to all. So it's always splitting multiple codes. Otherwise, you're going to get a different result when you try to double code things. I like to multiple code all the time, so I think that's really gives you the most flexibility. So that I think is probably your best option there. At least that's what I recommend. And then you have some other controls in here. One of them I want to point out is the maximum line for line length, line work. So I have that set to 300 feet, which means if there's two codes that are miscoded, I forgot to stop a line or something, if it's longer than 300 feet, it still won't connect it. So on really large sites, that's a nice option because it helps get rid of some of that spaghetti you get, or lines crossing through the site. And on really, really large data sets, sometimes that's tough to sort out which one was coded incorrectly. So that's one way of controlling that quite easily. So now I'm going to take a look at the special codes. So you're probably familiar with this, but these special codes, these are what give you a lot of flexibility and a lot of power with Carlson in the field, because you can use any of these codes to modify the original code. And there's just a ton that you can do here. These are all can be changed by the user. So you've got you've got defaults when you first load this up, but all of these can be changed. I have a few of them changed, like B and E replaced beginning and ending, so it just saves a few keystrokes there, B and E. You got to make sure that if you change these with an alpha code, it doesn't also exist in your regular code table. You can't have it both. And I believe if you do that, it should prompt and warn you that you've got a duplicate. But and if you do have a duplicate, the special code is going to win. So you want to make sure that that's already not a code. So a PCPT is just the beginning of a curve. the end of a curve, just always keep in mind, if you just put a PC, it will do a 3-point curve even without the PT. So PC is the beginning of the curve. It looks for the next 2 shots and connects them. So you really don't need a PT unless you have more than 3 points on a curve. So when you put in a PT, like in this data set here, it kind of looks backwards, finds the PC, connects all the points in between, and does basically a smooth fit curve in between, but it holds a vertex on the point that you shot, so it does not drift off the point. So a couple that I want to look at is close, to close a figure, and RECT, a rectangle. I'm going to talk about horizontal and vertical offsets. Just as a note, offset both is really, really handy. Pick up little pathways and give it an offset in both directions and draw both sides at the same time. Really nice. You can even join a point number. If you remember what point number you were, you could have any line where it connect to a point by typing JPN. And these special codes, they're separated by a space. The rule about them is to make sure that when you add a special code, that you add it immediately after the code you're modifying. So if you have a string of codes, if it's kind of hard to see now with that small attributes there, but this is EOG, which stands for Edge of Gravel 1 space EP. So if the edge of gravel was supposed to be the beginning of a curve, you would have to have EOG1 space PC and then space EP, because you can't put the PC at the end. It'll attribute it to the EP and not the edge of gravel code. So make sure that these special codes go immediately following the code that it's going to modify. All right, so let me just demonstrate how to use a couple of these. So this house, for example, has a 8-foot jog, and then comes over here and then supposed to close out. So I can modify these codes. So I can just simply double click on these and change the description right here and add the jog to it. Or I can use another tool called Field to Finish Inspector. So I'm going to pull that up. And at the bottom of the screen, it shows all the codes that are in this data set. Not all the codes that are in the code table, just the ones that are in this data set. And I can highlight, I can hit house. Here's all the points. And I can highlight point number 120. I can also just type it in right here. So its house code is HSE. So space jog, that's the special code, followed by the dimension. I want it to go 8 feet to the left, so you put in a -8. Hit apply. And just of note, you can actually update the description in the raw file, your RW5 file, if you wanted to make sure that that was using the same descriptions as what they are in here. And you hit OK. So it drew that little jog in there. And then when I go to point 121, I can say space CLO. So that's going to close it back to 116. So those are very, very useful special codes. I use those often. Rectangles code I'm going to use on the shed. Also a really good code to use. I can select my shed points, or again, I can just type in the number here. I can see which one I'm going to change. It's point number 123. The code pops up. So it's the first shot is shed, second shot is shed 123, and I'll say space rectangle, and I'm going to make it 10 feet to the right. So that's going to create a rectangle 10 feet wide.